welcome to another episode of VNture Podcast, your weekly source of all things visual novel. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we shall venture into another discussion about VNs. Today we have a pleasure to welcome our esteemed guest, PabloC. He's a person of many things. I know him as a valuable pillar of Polish anime-related community I'm running, but more importantly, for our audience, he is a passionate VN reader who took it upon himself to participate in fun translation projects. Well, without further ado, PabloC, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I am Pablo, and like Emar said, I am part of the Polish anime community, and I also take an active part in fan translations, although I don't have a very large experience in this regard because I only translated basically 2 titles. So my journey with translation started with learning Japanese, obviously. And my journey with that started with, I think it's not an unusual story. I simply started reading visual novels and one day found a visual novel that was not translated but looked very interesting. That visual novel was Gore Screaming Show, and the title itself sounded like something that would be definitely up my alley. But again, it was a gory title. I did not expect it to ever get an English translation, although Manga Gamer announced that they are planning to release it just recently, so that's a nice surprise. But at the time when I found this visual novel, I had no option to read it. So I started looking around the forum. I think it was, I don't remember even which forum it was, Honkfire at the time, I think. And I found many posts talking about machine translations. It sounded very easy. Just run the visual novel, run some software, and you get an English text. So a very good option. So I gave it a try, and it turned out that it sounded too good to be true. And indeed, it was too good, because what I saw was a total gibberish that had made absolutely no sense. So that option was basically out. But while I was interested, I was looking around the whole machine translation business, I found 2 programs that looked actually quite useful. It was Mekup and JParser. Those are parsers that basically take the Japanese text, parse single words, and provide dictionary definitions to those words. And that seemed like something that was serviceable, at least, and they seemed to work quite well. So I figured out maybe I would try learning some basic Japanese to help me read with those programs. I started with basic alphabets, hiragana and katakana, and then I found Tae Kim's grammar guide, which is a fantastic learning tool for basics of Japanese grammar. It turned out to be a lot easier than I anticipated. It's by far the easiest grammar of all languages that I ever tried to learn, which includes English, Polish, and German. Polish being the most weird one and the most difficult one, definitely, by far. So it turned out to be quite easy, and I rather quickly learned enough basic grammar to figure out how the sentences work. And I tried, without any knowledge about vocabulary or kanji, I just ran a very simple visual novel. It was something very crude and simple and focused on the sexual content, basically a nukige, and I just tried reading it. It took me a long time, but even without knowing kanji and any vocabulary, with the help of the parsers, I managed to read the whole thing. And I went from there. So I started naturally remembering the kanji and the words that appear in visual novels, and gradually gained more and more experience.
I have a question about what you just mentioned.
Yes?
How did you found your first title, the novice one you could, try your skills? How did you find it?
I have no idea. I just found something completely random at Visual Novel Database. Just picked something that was... I just looked at titles that have a very short time.
Okay.
And just picked something from this list. I don't even remember what was it. It was probably something unmentionable.
Fair enough.
But it turned out it wasn't even that bad.
Again, I was very curious, do you have or maybe encountered a list for a novice Japanese speakers and or readers to look at? But you went with a random selection and found your girl.
Yes, completely random. I know it was a visual novel by the Circle Magical Girl. And I read actually a few of their titles because they turned out to be quite entertaining and not that stupid, because at that point in time I had very little experience with arrow-focused visual novels. I think I only read Bible Black from the arrow-heavy titles, and I didn't like it at all. So, and what was available in English was not interesting in the slightest, so I just assumed that arrow-focused visual novels are just crap, basically. But it turns out that titles that I picked completely at random were actually quite enjoyable. So I read a few titles and I went from there. And actually I started focusing on titles with rather high sexual content because of that, because they turned out to be quite fun to read. Surprisingly, because I expected something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, that's very impressive that you've learned so many languages, including Japanese.
I didn't learn German. I tried and failed completely. That's
already very impressive in its own right.
I know that feeling.
Yes, I only had this in high school, I think. And my mother knows German very well, so she was trying to teach me something, but it was completely useless. I'm completely unable to learn German, and I didn't have any motivation. So I learned English quite well in around high school as well, mainly from watching anime with subtitles. So that was my learning tool, basically, and some video games, because when I was very little, there were some games that, basically there were no translations for video games. So if I wanted to play something, I had to play in English, because there was no other option, so I picked up a lot of English that way. So basically, I learn languages by having fun.
That's the best way.
Number one advice,
yeah. And German wasn't fun at all, so...
Yeah.
Oh.
How long did it take you to learn Japanese? You mentioned going right from the start, just learning the hiragana and katakana, and then through the Taikim method, right?
Yes, and hiragana and katakana is something that I picked up, in less than a week. But that was right after finishing medical university, so my brain was working in a slightly weird way, so I basically had a photographic memory. So those two alphabets were basically a breeze. And Taikim's guide is so well written that it also took me very little time. I think if I had to learn it for an exam, I would probably take 2 weeks. But I was just learning at a slow pace, so a few months, 1 or 2 months, I think. It wasn't really a huge time investment. Mm-hmm. But I am still learning, because like I said, that was just the baseline that allowed me to start reading visual novels, though very slowly, because I had to basically look up every single kanji and every single word in the dictionary.
Exactly. So I was about to mention.
That's the beginning, yes.
Yeah, because the hiragana and katakana and Taikim stuff, those are pretty straightforward to get through. And, if you're a fast learner, you can get through those guides pretty fast. But then the whole point of reading the first visual novel, even with a parser to translate into English, it's slow going, right? You have to look everything up, and then you kind of have to drill all of these different kanji and grammar meanings into your brain, right? And that takes a while.
And that's an ongoing experience, and I'm still learning. I don't know enough kanji to say that I know Japanese yet. So, and I'm still just out of habit. I'm using parsers as well, because they are very convenient. So whenever I find something I don't know, I just quickly check what the parsers say, and I have a quick entry to the dictionary, which is not that great. As I have learned, I learned to use Japanese dictionaries quite a lot. But for the beginning, for very short visual novels, just learning hiragana, katakana, and taikim's grammar, it's a good starting point. So of course, the reading experience wasn't that great. It was very slow, but it was possible to understand everything with enough time spent on browsing the dictionary. So that's why I picked something slow, because something short, because I expected to go very slowly, and that was definitely the case. It was a very fun experience, and it helped me start learning kanji. Though again, I'm not aiming for knowing Japanese, so I'm learning the kanji that I encounter along the way. So I probably know a lot of useless stuff that is never used in everyday life, like tentacles and stuff. And I don't know. And I probably don't know a lot of vocabulary that is used in everyday conversations because of that. So I'm focused exclusively on reading visual novels and now playing other Japanese games.
I can already visualize that in my mind.
Yes.
Your vocabulary does not have something like grocery? Shop? Nah. Tentacles? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I never tried speaking with anyone, so my pronunciation is probably horrible. So
there are many aspects to learning a language. Yeah, the reading, the writing, the pronunciation, the sentence forming, and for visual novels, thankfully, the most important one is just about the reading. So for anyone only interested in reading visual novels in Japanese, you have a smoother road ahead of you than most other people.
Yes, exactly. And it's an easier thing than most people imagine, because very useful tools that help with that. Not machine translation, because they are completely useless, and you can't read anything with them, you can't learn anything from them, and that's basically a waste of time. So it's much better to just learn basic things, grammar, and just start reading with parsers that quite well. They are not perfect, and I found many mistakes that they make, but for the purpose of reading visual novels, for the novice readers, they are perfectly fine.
Even more so than just novice reading levels, because it led to you retranslating Konosora, right?
Yes, and that was also something that I considered part of the learning experience. I was at this point rather comfortable with reading visual novels, and while I was browsing Fua Novel, I found a project that was aiming to fix the, how should I say it, not so great official release of Konosora, titled If My Heart Had Wings. And there's quite a story behind this release that I think you are aware of.
Well, for anyone not aware, yes, this was first released in English as If My Heart Had Wings, I believe 2013 or something like that. And a lot of it was censored. That's the important part, right?
Yes, and the censorship was quite extreme. So it wasn't just removing the explicit content. They went a little farther, because they aimed for a 12 plus, 10 plus rating, some kind of very low rating. So they went as far as redrawing kissing scenes, replacing any jokes that were a little naughty, and so on. So they went really, really, really far with the censorship.
Now that makes me a bit curious what you just said. Because you say the censorship was very extensive and they altered the game. Now, with all that said, you went to restoration project to restore the missing content.
Yes.
Where did you find it? Where was the missing content?
In the original game. So
it was just made inaccessible. They didn't remove ported from the Japanese release.
in the Japanese original
see.
Japanese release. So, well, I didn't do anything like that because I'm not a hacker.
Okay, fair enough.
But we had yes. So there was a guy who basically ripped everything from the original
I
game,
see.
took the scripts, put them in the Excel spreadsheet, and put the original English translation beside it, and found what lines are missing and so on. And also all the original images, because images were also quite heavily censored. I think almost half of the images were missing.
Oh god.
Something
Oh
like
my
that.
goodness.
It was extreme, yes. That's why the finished restoration patch had a few gigabytes, I think,
Whoa.
because it was restoring basically half of the images, and if I remember right, 20% of the text also was basically cut.
Oh,
A fifth of the whole thing. Wow.
wow.
Yeah, so that's a rather extreme and heavy-handed censorship.
Mm-hmm. And then, well, number one, thank you very much for your work. Especially for a fan translation. So this was you simply doing it out of your own free time and passion, right?
Yes, but I had ulterior motives. Like I said, I was considering this a part of learning experience. So I used this as basically a free lesson in 2 languages at the same time, because I was practicing Japanese because I already knew it relatively okay, though I'm not nearly satisfied with my level of knowledge even today. But for the purpose of reading and, as it turns out, translating a visual novel, it was probably good enough. But I was also practicing writing in English, which is also something rather useful. And I got everything for free. So I don't really consider this a waste of time. I had quite a lot of benefits from these projects. And that's how I got into translating things, basically, because it helps me keep 2 of the languages that I use well practiced. So that's a very beneficial thing.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, in 2018, you revisited If My Heart Had Wings, right? In a complete retranslation from the ground up. Is that right?
Yes, the initial restoration patch was just aiming to restore the missing content. And I didn't really take a huge part in this project because I just translated, I think, 2 of the missing sex scenes. It was a huge team, and basically everyone got together and everyone worked on this. Everything was put together as a restoration patch. And this took barely a few weeks. It was a very quick project. But then there was so to speak, a stretch goal of the entire project, which was a total retranslation. Because aside from censorship, the translation wasn't that great. From what I heard when I first saw this project, one of the routes in this visual novel was focusing on characters progressing from being basically sex friends into proper lovers. And this entire route was obviously completely and utterly butchered, to the point that it was impossible to understand what is going on. So the project had an additional goal in mind, which was fixing the original, the initial official translation. Basically, I assume that it will be just a quick translation check, and maybe retranslating this one problematic route. But I was quite wrong in my assumption. Yes, because when I started going through the Cobalt route, I just gave it a quick read with some light edits. I found it quite suspicious because a lot of things didn't add up and didn't match the Japanese text. But I just went straight to the most problematic route, and it was a complete disaster. So I started retranslating it basically from scratch. I just threw the official translation to the garbage bin and wrote everything by myself. But then I went back to the common route, and it turned out that a lot of things is wrong there as well. Even though people said, well, the initial part is okay, but later on it gets worse. But the initial part wasn't okay at all. So I decided to basically retranslate everything from scratch. And at this point, most of the people from the original restoration patch, they went their own way, and I was pretty much left alone in this project. I was slowly translating line by line everything from scratch. Then an editor joined me. He was Aviator, that was his nickname, and he was a pilot. So we had a lot of we had a lot of Skype discussions about this project, and he helped me a lot with proper aviation-related terminology, because I had no experience with piloting, and this visual novel have a very heavy focus on gliders. That's the main theme of the whole visual novel. Basically, it's a bunch of high school kids building a glider and flying it. So there is a lot of info dumping about aviation, aerodynamics, gliders, and so on, piloting. And he was a huge help when it comes to translating those parts and consulting them. And since he was a native English speaker, he helped me polishing and editing the English translation. We worked on this project slowly for, I think, 4 or 5 years. That's how long it took. I am very slow. Yes, I am very slow. Because I was quite busy with my real life. I was working on my PhD at this point, so I had a lot of real life stuff to deal with. But in my free time, yes, I like to sit back, relax, and just translate a few lines. It was a form of basically entertainment for me. I was having fun doing this, and that's why I lasted so long. And then more people started joining as they find out that the project is still going on. We had a new hacker and new editor, and a few other people joined in as well. And finally, after I think, it was 2018, so it took almost 5 years, we released a proper, complete retranslation of the whole visual novel.
I was amazed. I am amazed hearing you describe that you not only through the passion endure those arduous times with retranslation, but also managed to get a person with field of expertise exactly matching the theme of visual novel. I am amazed listening to that, because from my experience, when visual novels likes to tackle things of that nature, going for a specific theme, it helps immensely if they really do their research. It's unbelievable difference what it makes. So I can only imagine how much better it shaped up to be thanks to that input. Wow.
Yes, and but that I take no credit for this, because it's the Aviator that reached out to me. He found the project on Fua Novel and found this visual novel quite interesting, because it was again in his in his field of interests. And he reached out to me, and that's how we met. So I take absolutely no credit for this, but yes, he helped a lot. Because I could handle physics of flight, because I'm quite familiar with general physics, so that was not a problem. But aviation-related terminology, well, that's a different story. Yeah. And in the original translation, everything was wrong. Completely wrong.
Oh, no.
So they didn't, I don't think they consulted anything, so they just went ahead and translated how it seemed to them, and sometimes it was the opposite of the original, of what the original Japanese line said and what the aviation terminology should be. So some lines really didn't make sense, though it was probably not very obvious for someone who has no idea about aviation, because, well, they just read some info dumps basically and they fall asleep. They are, yes, if someone is not very interested in aviation, they are probably quite boring. I had fun because I was translating it and I was enjoying the process of translation. But if I had to read this visual novel as just something to read, I'd probably fall asleep as well, because it's not my kind of visual novel at all. But I enjoyed it much more because of the whole translation process and reading it in original, thinking how to write it in English, overcoming many problems like do we want to include honorifics or not, what exactly are we translating, how much we are living in the original language, idioms that are impossible to translate, and so on. It was a overall very fun experience, and it took quite a long time. But again, I had a lot of real life stuff going on, and I was treating this just like basically like a rest from doing work-related stuff, because it was an enjoyable process, and I really liked doing it. So it was basically having fun for me. And I learned a lot about aerodynamics and aviation thanks to that, and thanks to our long talks over Skype with Aviator. So that was a nice learning experience. That was a nice learning experience.
While in school for a PhD, you're just casually learning all about aerodynamics too. So you could translate something from one foreign language to another.
That's amazing.
Oh my goodness, that is incredible effort, dude.
Yes, that's my idea of having fun. I like to do something that leaves something behind. I don't like doing nothing of substance. So I was enjoying my PhD as well. So that wasn't exactly a hard thing to do, really.
Mm-hmm. For the translation process, so you mentioned there were more people involved than just you, the main translator. There was the hacker involved, there was an editor, and I think you mentioned a few testers too. So there were multiple people involved in this, and how were their roles split up? And how did you communicate and organize this translation effort with them?
Well, we communicated by Skype chat and some voice chats as well. And coordination, well, I was basically a leader, and whoever could contribute basically joined usually on Fua Novel. So that was the center of the project, and whoever was available, whoever felt like participating, they were contacting me or one of the other team members, and they were doing whatever they could. But yes, it was a group effort. Definitely a hacker was absolutely essential, because we had to put everything together in the visual novel itself, because at the point I was working, at the point when I was working on this translation, I basically had an Excel spreadsheet, and I had no way to do anything with it, because I'm not really competent when it comes to hacking, programming, and so on. So I had basically a useless Excel file that was, without a hacker, it was absolutely not applicable to anything. So the hacker was essential. Editor, I would say, is essential as well, because I'm not a native English speaker. I know English quite well, because I use it professionally as well for teaching students, writing publications, and so on. But that was actually a huge problem, because I was familiar with professional English, and most importantly, a medical English, because that's my field of expertise, and that's what I learned at the university. So when it came to sex scenes, there were a lot of things involving sexual organs and so on, and I accidentally translated them using professional medical anatomical terminology.
Oh no!
Because yes, I thought that's how you write these things, because I was just familiar with this type of English, and when my editor started reading this, he basically was completely shocked, and he actually didn't quite understand what he was reading, because it was written in anatomical English that is not commonly used. It was a huge surprise for me, but I fixed this bad habit of mine, and I make sure to check if what I'm writing is actually a common casual English, or if it's something weird that is used in medical dictionaries. So that was a very funny story. When he started reading my translations of sex scenes, it turned out to be quite a disaster.
That's actually hilarious.
Yes, that was definitely hilarious, but I fixed my habit of using medical English, and now I'm very careful not to write anything strange. I make sure to check if the words I'm using aren't very professional or something like that. So that was a very valuable lesson, because I was just writing what I think was correct in English. I didn't really think about it, and it turned out to be it wasn't very sexy, let's say it like that.
No, I missed the mark.
Don't worry, I'm sure I'm absolutely certain there exists a visual novel waiting for you that is untranslated with a field of study require medical knowledge. So don't worry.
I found some of them already. Yes, and it requires a lot of knowledge about internal organs and surgery, if you know where I'm going with it.
Okay, I might have a clue.
Yes, exactly.
Aye. But speaking of translated works you've done, you're also currently working on whaling Guignol. I hope I pronounced that right.
It's impossible to pronounce right because it's in French, so you know. No matter how hard you try, it's impossible. And yes, that's something that I also worked. That's my second big project. I took part in some minor projects like translating a single sex scene or something like that. And I also translated a very simple simulation game on one forum. But that took me, like 2 days because there was just interface and not much text to translate. So that's really not worth mentioning. But yes, the Whaling Guignol is my second big project. And that's something that I picked up as a complete solo project. So unlike in Konosora, this time I wasn't working with any team. I did everything by myself. And that's thanks to the tool that I found, which is called RPG Maker Trans. It's a very simple hacking tool that is idiot-friendly, so I managed to basically decrypt the files, get the text files out of them, and then put everything together into the game.
So I understand that tool allowed you to substitute hacker, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
I understand at some point you had to substitute tester. Now, my question becomes, how did you manage to substitute or fill the role of editor then?
I didn't.
Okay.
I did everything. Yes, I did everything this time by myself. I was thinking about getting someone to help, but it turned out that role-playing games are written in a rather easier language. It's a lot of dialogues, so it wasn't that hard. Though I would think that having an editor look over this text would be quite beneficial because I was missing typos.
Oh, I see.
Yes, it was very hard to find my own typos.
Yeah.
But there is more to this story, actually, because at some point I got an idea of releasing the game officially, because there were actually some technical things that I couldn't handle, like there is a nameable main character, and the name, the table where you choose the name is in Japanese. And I had, because the hacking tool that I had only extracted the text files to translate and didn't do anything else, and I have no idea about programming, so I couldn't fix it myself. So I reached out to the developer of the game and asked if he would be interested in releasing the game in English. So, yes, and that was unfortunately right at the start of the global virus situation. So everything was basically a mess. And I also didn't have time to properly look for solutions for the problems that I couldn't handle myself. So I just contacted the author. He was unfortunately working on a different game at this point, but he was interested in my project, so we agreed that I just give him the files, whatever I had, and he promised that he will look into this later. I left the project at this point, and I started focusing on the real-life stuff that was quite absorbing at this point, because everything, again, was a mess. And I kind of forgot about this whole project until one day I found Whaling Guignol released on Steam, which was quite surprising because this is a game that features a rather young characters that is definitely not suitable for Steam, at least that's what I would think. And the screenshots were quite suspicious because almost all of them were in Japanese. Okay, I was surprised that the developer didn't contact me. I read the description and there was a red flag because I wrote the description of the game that was on the DL site, and that was not my translation. And it wasn't that great. it wasn't a machine translation by any stretch of the imagination, but it was rather brief, and the translator took a lot of shortcuts. So this time I contacted the publisher of the game, which is Wasabi Entertainment. It's as it turned out, a small Japanese localization company. Releases very simple eroge on Steam. And they release censored versions and have patches that restore content on their site. So that's their politics, and that's probably why Wailing Guignol was approved on Steam, because everything is basically cut out of the game, and you basically have to apply the patch, otherwise you would watch a black screen all the time, because all problematic features are removed from the Steam release. And somehow it works.
It's really interesting that you mentioned Steam. That's its whole topic for another time. But Steam is very inconsistent about anything involving mature content. Some things get the ban hammer, some things do not. And so, I mean, it's entirely possible that it could be released on Steam with full content allowed and whatnot. And it's also happened several times where there is a game released on Steam and it's only in Japanese or Chinese or whatever, but you know, English players, or I guess you could say Western individuals, can still buy it, even if there doesn't exist a translation patch or whatnot. So
yes, they are using
with Steam, a bit of a mess. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I contacted them, and they basically immediately, when I pointed out that I promised the developer that we had a promise with the developer that I translated this game, well, they immediately sent me a free copy of their game, and because it turns out that they did the translation, the developer didn't give them my files, so he basically gave them the game and they translated it by themselves. It turned out that the game had problems, because I saw on the Steam page that some people are complaining about errors, crashes, and so on. So it sounded very suspicious already, because I tested the game myself, and apart from some technical problems that I couldn't fix, it should be working. So that was quite unnerving already. But it turns out that they did the entire translation by themselves. Again, it's a small developer that has experience with very simple doujin eroge. And Wailing Guignol is a rather big game and a very story-heavy game. It has around 15,000 lines, so it's a very big title when it comes to translating text, and it's quite complicated. So they didn't do a great job, especially on the technical level, because they introduced some errors that completely broke the game. Now, I don't blame them, because this game is very fragile. It breaks basically spontaneously, so I broke it myself several times, and I don't even know why. So it's basically a game made by a single person. The developer works completely alone, and he even wrote on the DL site page that this game was made by one person. There may be bugs, and yes, there were some bugs, especially when you tried modifying the text. It basically everything blows up. So, but I managed to get it working, and so I reached out to the publisher, gave them my translation, and suggested that I will help them improve it and basically replace their translation with mine. And I also helped them test the game. And thanks to that, this is the only Steam game that I actually have with some hours played using the Steam client, because I was testing it. Otherwise, my Steam library is basically completely empty, because I don't use this platform at all.
Yeah.
Wow, not at all.
Yes, one of the reasons is what we mentioned already, is the strange policy of censoring basically everything with Japanese content with no rhyme or reason. So that's one of the reasons why I like them. And the second one is that requirement of the client. That's also something that I don't really appreciate. So I don't use Steam basically at all. I only had a Steam account because I was discussing Konosora translation on Steam. So that's the only reason why I even had a Steam account to begin with. And again, I revisited Steam because of my translation. So, long story short, I helped them fix everything, even the errors that I didn't know how to fix myself. They helped with that, on the other hand. So, hey, everything worked in the end. And finally, after some time, we released my translation on Steam. So that's how in the end, I got my translation released officially. And again,
that's an amazing
it was-
story from fan translation to become official one, approved by developer, and together, hand in hand, fix all the problems the game had.
I hope everything is fixed. I tested the game several times, and right now nobody complains on Steam. So I assume everything works. Though that's the game that people are actually afraid to comment on Steam because again,
I see.
it has a very young character. So it's not a game that people try to comment on review or Steam. They don't want anyone to see this game in their library. So yeah. It's a very problematic game because of the content. So
when do you think your translation project will be finished? When can people expect your new translation for it?
The translation is already available, so everything is already out.
Oh, you're already finished?
Yes, it
my
was
goodness,
finished.
never
I
knew.
think yes, it was finished a month ago or so. No, I think it's even longer. I don't remember. Well, there is a note on Steam when was their last update. So yeah, everything is put together, and I also helped testing it. So now it's my translation, basically.
Congratulations!
Congratulations.
Though I think I am the slowest translator ever, because
No.
it took around 2 years, I think more, with the virus-related delay. So the translation itself took roughly 2 years. Which is quite slow for a rather simple game. And then there was a delay caused by the virus and all this mess with the initial Steam release. So it was a very, very slow project. But again, I did this all by myself and I am very slow. So unfortunately, I am a bit hesitant to tackle any bigger projects because they will take forever to finish.
I can imagine.
No, the finished product is what's most important.
Exactly.
Congrats.
You persevered and finished the project successfully. Congrats.
Yes, I am stubborn and I don't drop things. So they may take forever, but I will get things done in the end.
Great. And with that, speaking of finishing things, thank you for your guest appearance. We need to wrap things up. Special thanks to our guest Pablo, and I would like also to extend our gratitude towards all the named and unnamed members of the translation for Konosora. Thanks for all your hard effort, and as well for all the listeners on our podcast. Thank you for listening. Please like, favorite, comment, subscribe, and see you next week.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast.
Glad to have you.
Bye.
Bye.